Hello family, enjoy this relaxing moment with AfriTales 38. Remember to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comment section, and generously hit the like button because it means a lot to us. Please relax and enjoy as we dive in the story. The day the river wept. The sun rose gently over the sleepy village of Odwama, casting golden streaks on the shimmering surface of River Oluma. It was a morning like every other, quiet, serene, and full of promise. Birds sang. Fishermen prepared their nets. Among them was Okizi, a humble man with rough palms, sun-hardened skin, and eyes that still held hope. His life was simple. Wake before dawn. Throw the nets. Thank God for whatever the river gave. He had only one son, Chidra, a boy with wild dreams and clever eyes. The boy often sat by the water's edge, watching his father walk. "Papa," he once asked, "why do you smile even when the catch is small?" Okizi had chuckled. "Because it's not the fish that feeds us, son. It's the peace." But peace, like the morning mist, vanished too soon. That day, a black SUV roared into the village. Out came men in suits and dark glasses. Behind them, wearing an agbada embroidered with power and pride, was Chief Damian Uma, Okizi's uncle, a man whose shadow stretched farther than any tree in the village. He was a commissioner now, with friends in government and enemies in silence. Okizi dropped his fishing net as the men marched toward him. "Uncle," he said, confused. Damian didn't smile. "This land you're squatting on, it's mine now." Okizi blinked. "What are you saying?" "This is our ancestral land. My father farmed here. My mother gave birth to me on this land." Damian laughed, cold, cruel. "And now, it belongs to the government. I pulled some strings. It's been reallocated. I bought it fair and square. If you don't vacate in 48 hours, my boys will remove you." The villagers gathered, whispering in fear. Some shook their heads. Others walked away. No one dared speak up. Okizi's lips trembled. "But I have nowhere else." "You have the river," Damian spat. "Go and fish." With that, he turned and left. Dust rose behind his SUV like the memory of a slap. That night, Okizi didn't speak. He sat under the moon, beside his son. Chidra, barely 10, didn't understand everything, but he saw the tears his father wiped when he thought no one was looking. "Papa," he whispered, "are we poor?" Okizi looked at him. "No, my son. We just don't have money. But Uncle Damian has both money and land. Why didn't you fight him?" Okizi's eyes turned to the sky. "Because sometimes, to fight a lion, you must first raise a lion." The quiet rebuilt. Morning came slowly the next day, as if even the sun was ashamed to rise on a broken man. The land was gone. The small hut where Okizi kept his nets and dried fish had been bulldozed before dawn. All that remained were splinters of wood and scattered memories. But instead of weeping, Okizi stood silently by the river, his son by his side. The villagers whispered behind their doors. Some pitied him. Others feared being next. But no one offered help. Still, Okizi did not bend. He moved to a muddy clearing farther down the river, land no one wanted because it was swampy and mosquito-infested. With bamboo sticks and palm fronds, he built a crude shelter. Then he began again, digging, fishing, praying. Chidra followed him everywhere. Even as a boy, he learned to patch nets, scoop water, and smoke fish over firewood. In the evenings, he read old textbooks his father had salvaged from the waste bins of the town school. "Why are you reading under this dim lantern?" Okizi once asked, after a long day of fishing. "Because I want to be better, Papa. I want to speak English like the people in Abuja." Okizi smiled. "Then you must study harder than all of them." So he did. Even when they had only one meal a day. Even when rain flooded their hut and carried away half their belongings. even when his shoes wore out and he had to walk barefoot to school. Okizi sold more fish. He learned how to breed fingerlings and started a small fish pond with empty barrels and broken tiles. It wasn't much, but he became known as the river man who won't die. Some mocked him. Others began to respect him. One day, a teacher from the local school visited. Okizi, he said, your son came first in the entire district. There's a scholarship offer, secondary school in the city. Okizi didn't blink. What do we need to do? Just transport him there and feed him. Okizi nodded. That night, he didn't eat. The next morning, he sold all his fish stock and borrowed a battered bicycle. When Chidra left for school, he carried only a small bag of clothes, an old dictionary, and a loaf of bread. His father walked him halfway and said, "Never forget who you are, Chidra. And never let anyone take what's yours." The years crawled by like river snails. Okizi's back bent more each day, but his heart stood straighter. He expanded his fish ponds. Word spread to nearby villages. He began supplying small markets. People started calling him Okizi Fisheries, even though he still lived in a hut. But what made him proud wasn't the fish, it was the letters from Chidra. Letters filled with perfect grammar, legal terms, and questions about justice. Papa, did Uncle Damien have any legal right to take our land? Papa, are there papers to prove you lived there first? Papa, I want to learn how to fight for people like you. Okizi read them slowly, again and again. And every night, he whispered to the wind. One day, my son will speak for me. Hope in a boy. City life was a different river altogether. Chidra had never seen so many cars, buildings, or people who walked past one another like strangers. But he wasn't afraid. In his pocket was a small folded paper, scholarship approval, Chidra Okizi. In his heart was a fire, one his father lit the day they said goodbye by the river. He excelled in school. Not because he was the smartest, but because he worked like a man who had nothing to lose. While others had laptops and tutors, Chidra studied under candlelight, borrowing textbooks, recording his lessons on second-hand devices, and waking before dawn to revise. He always came first. And people noticed. His teachers encouraged him to apply for national competitions. He wrote essays on land rights, public law, and justice. One of them, titled The Unheard Cry of Rural Owners, won an international writing contest and was published in a student law journal. The award came with something more powerful than applause, a full scholarship to study law in the United Kingdom. When he returned to the village that holiday, Okizi was still by the river, mending nets with hands that had aged like weathered leather. He saw his son walking down the path, taller, sharper, wearing a coat too big for his frame but pride in every step. Okizi stood up, eyes shining. "My son, you've returned." Chidra hugged him long and tight. "I got the scholarship, Papa. I'm going abroad." The old fisherman didn't speak immediately. He just placed his palm on his son's head and said, "May you rise like the tide, and never fall like a broken canoe." Life in the UK was fast, demanding, and full of unfamiliar rules, but Chidra adapted. He knew what he wanted, to understand the law deeply enough to one day face a lion like Chief Damian Yuma. He buried himself in books about land ownership in developing nations, ancestral claims and customary land tenure, corruption in African land allocation, case studies of legal land recovery. And when he wasn't in class, he was volunteering in legal aid clinics, helping the helpless, just like his father once was. Years passed. He graduated with honors. Then earned a master's degree in property and land law. Then passed the bar. Each milestone, he mailed a picture home. His father kept them in a wooden box beneath his sleeping mat. Sometimes he would pull them out, smile, and whisper, "He's coming." But Chief Damian was not worried. By now, he had become a regional leader. His land holdings had multiplied. He had buildings, cars, and henchmen. People called him the Lion of the East. He had long forgotten Okizi, the river rats whose land he stole. But lions forget. Eagles do not. One early morning, Chidera stood at the banks of River Oluma again. He had returned. A lawyer now. Tall. Quiet. Focused. The people stared, unsure if it was truly him. But when Okizi emerged from his pond and saw his son in a black lawyer's robe, barefoot on the muddy riverbank, he dropped his bucket. Chidera. The boy knelt and touched his father's feet. Papa. I've come home. But I didn't come alone. He opened a brown envelope and handed it over. Inside were land documents. Maps. Photos. Evidence. A legal complaint. What is this? Okizi asked. Chidera looked into his father's eyes. A net, Papa. One I've spent years weaving. And I'm ready to cast it. Winds beyond the waters. The village of Odwama had never seen a court summons before, especially not one with Chief Damian Uma's name boldly printed at the top. People whispered in small groups, some with fear, others with curiosity. Could the all-powerful chief really be taken to court? And by whom? The answer came quickly, Okizi's son, Chidera, now a barrister. Damian's reaction was pure rage. Who does that boy think he is? I own that land. I paid for it. I have titles, signatures, officials backing me. But the silence in the room when he spoke to his advisor said otherwise. Some of those officials were no longer in office. Some had been arrested for corruption. The trail he thought was clean was now rusted with time, and Chidera had dug up every corner of it. Back at the river, Okizi was still trying to believe it all. He sat quietly each evening as Chidera laid out documents across their small bamboo table. Papa, Chidera said one night, the truth is on our side. We just need the village elders to testify. I found the original land boundary markers. I traced the traditional ownership tree. You were robbed. And now, we'll speak in a language they can't silence, the law. Okizi sighed. Are you sure you're ready to fight him? I was born for this, Chidera replied. The legal preparations began in earnest. Chidera filed the land dispute at the High Court in the nearby city of Enugu. He had to go through several processes. Filing motions to subpoena land registry records. Requesting testimonies from elders and neighboring landowners. Collecting area images, survey documents, and audio recordings of village meetings. He even found a retired civil servant who admitted that Damian had forged his signature years ago during the reallocation process. The more he dug, the uglier it got. But Chief Damian wasn't going down without a fight. He countersued for defamation and threatened to use every connection he had left. Armed men began showing up near the river. One of Okizi's fish ponds was poisoned. Anonymous calls warned them to drop the matter or face consequences. Okizi wanted to stop. My son, it's not worth your life. But Chidera held his ground. If we stop now, he wins. Not just over us, but over everyone too afraid to speak. The day of the pretrial hearing, Chidera wore his robes with quiet pride. The courtroom was filled with villagers, journalists, and curious onlookers. Damian arrived with his entourage, dressed in a gold-embroidered agbada, sunglasses hiding his unease. He smirked as he passed Chidera. But the smirk faded when the judge looked at Chidera's opening evidence, historical records showing the land's ancestral ownership traced back to Okizi's grandfather, with no legal documentation ever granting it to Damian. You have a mountain of paperwork, the judge said to Chidera. You also seem prepared for war. Chidera answered calmly, not war, my lord. Just justice, for a man who was forgotten by the system. That night, in the village, there was silence, but it was a different kind. Not the silence of fear, the silence before a storm that could cleanse. The villagers now looked at Okizi differently. Some brought food. Some offered witness accounts. Even the youths, once too scared to confront the chief, now whispered of hope. "You think he'll really win?" one asked. Another replied, "Have you seen that boy talk? His words are stronger than chief's money." Okizi sat by the river, his feet in the cool water. Chidra joined him quietly. "You're doing what I couldn't," the father said. "I only knew how to survive. But you're fighting back." Chidra smiled. "Because you gave me the strength to rise. This is our fight, Papa. And we're just getting started." Return of the Eagle. The air in Odwoma village was thick with anticipation. For years, the people had watched Chief Damian Uma grow untouchable, like a mountain that cast its shadow over every dream. Now, for the first time, that mountain trembled. Chidra, the boy who once paddled barefoot behind his father's canoe, had returned a man with fire in his chest and the law in his hands. He became a symbol of defiance. The media caught wind of the story. A popular radio station in Enugu aired a program titled The Fisherman's Son vs. The Lion of Odwoma. Journalists visited the river. They took photos of Okizi's humble fish ponds and interviewed him beneath the mango tree beside his bamboo hut. "What will you do if your son loses?" one reporter asked. Okizi smiled softly. "Then we go back to the river. But with our heads high." But deep in his heart, he hoped they'd never have to go back empty again. Back in the city, the case was gaining traction. Chidra spent his days poring over documents and building a timeline. When the land was registered under traditional ownership. When Chief Damian used forged signatures to claim government acquisition. When threats were made to silence resistance. But more than the facts, Chidra carried the truth in his voice. He called in experts, a land surveyor who validated the original boundary lines, and a handwriting analyst who proved the signature on the transfer was not that of the original chief who had died 3 years before the date. Damian's lawyers responded by burying the court in motions, delay tactics, and threats of countersuit. But Chidra was unshaken. "This man thinks law is for the rich," he told his legal team. "We are about to teach him otherwise." One evening, Chidra walked the length of the land that had been stolen. The land was fenced now. On it stood a 2-story mansion, abandoned and overgrown. Beside it, an uncompleted warehouse, the chief's investment project that stalled once government funds dried up. Chidra stopped at the far edge, where a twisted iroko tree still stood. He touched its bark gently. His father once tied nets here to dry. They had planted yams nearby. This place wasn't just dirt, it was memory. Blood. Story. "Justice isn't about winning a court case," he whispered. "It's about restoring the dignity they thought they erased." Back at home, Okizi watched as villagers began to shift. Some offered old photos of him on the land, proof he had lived and worked there before the chief took it. One old woman named Mama Ijoma, who had worked as a cleaner in the local council office, gave a signed affidavit confirming she had seen Chief Damian bribing officers during the so-called reallocation. "I remember his words," she said, voice cracking. "He told them, 'Don't worry. That river rat can't even spell his own name.'" Okizi didn't get angry. He just said, "Then let the one who can read, write a new chapter." The village church even held a prayer night. Old men cried. Mothers sang softly. Children listened to stories of how land was life, and how this was more than a court case, this was a reclaiming of a stolen legacy. Meanwhile, in his mansion, Chief Damian grew restless. His calls weren't returned. The governor he once bragged about was now busy. Some of his closest allies were distancing themselves. "They are treating me like a criminal," he barked at his lawyer. "They are preparing for what they think is coming," the lawyer replied. "This boy is dangerous." Damian scoffed. "He's just a fisherman's son." The lawyer looked up and said quietly, "Exactly. That's why you should be afraid." The final court hearing was near. Chidra stood before the mirror the night before, adjusting his robe. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. His father watched from the doorway. "You ready?" Chidra nodded. "I'm not just fighting for us anymore, Papa. I'm fighting for everyone who was told to keep quiet." Okizi placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Then tomorrow, speak loud enough for them all to hear." The legal net tightens. The courtroom was packed. Village elders in faded wrappers. Youths in clean Sunday shirts. Journalists with recorders. Even former political allies of Chief Damian sat in the back rows, curious to see how the mighty would defend his crown. On one side, Chief Damian Umar, dressed in regal agbada, flanked by a team of 5 lawyers. He sat with the arrogance of a lion surrounded by cubs. On the other side, Chidra Okizi stood alone, wearing his black robe and white bib, holding nothing but a single leather file. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a calm, grey-haired woman named Justice Omolola Odigon, entered with quiet authority. She had a reputation, fair, firm, incorruptible. She looked first at Damian, then at Chidra. "Let us begin." Chidra opened with a voice that didn't shake. "My lord, this case is not merely about land. It is about the abuse of power, the silencing of the poor, and the slow theft of dignity. My client, Mr. Okizi, is not a man of title. He is a man of truth. This land, illegally acquired by the defendant, was his inheritance, stolen through deception, intimidation, and forgery." Gasps filled the room. Chief Damian shifted in his seat. The courtroom became a stage, and Chidra became a storm. He presented historical records showing the land listed under the Okizi family lineage since the early 1900s. Handwritten letters from the late village chief confirming Okizi's ownership. A forensic report proving the signature on the land reallocation papers was forged. Testimonies from elders, neighbors, and even former council workers who were bribed or threatened into silence. Then he called Mama Ijeoma to the stand. She hobbled in with dignity, her head wrapped in bright cloth. "Tell the court what you witnessed," Chidra asked. With calm, unwavering truth, she told of envelopes stuffed with cash, meetings held in secret, and threats whispered to anyone who questioned the chief. Damian's lawyers tried to object. The judge silenced them with a raised hand. Next, Chidra played a hidden audio recording from years ago, a council meeting where Chief Damian laughed, saying, "Okizi. The man lives in a mud hut. By the time I'm done, he'll be lucky to keep the river." The courtroom froze. Damian's face went pale. When it was their turn, his lawyers stammered through their defense. That the land had been underutilized. That the government approved the transfer. That Okizi never formally registered it. But Chidra destroyed each argument with precision. He showed the court that customary land ownership in rural areas did not require registration under national systems if ancestral lineage was established. And he had already done that in black and white. "My lord," he said, "you cannot steal a man's home and call it development. You cannot oppress the voiceless and claim progress." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Umar," she said sternly, "do you have any personal statement to make?" Damian stood slowly. The courtroom went still. He looked around, at the villagers, the journalists, even at Okizi who now sat upright, his hands clasped in prayer. Damian paused. "I have served this region for years. I have invested in development. This land was given to me legally. I do not understand all this noise about emotions and rivers." The judge blinked. "So you deny using your office for personal gain?" "I did what was necessary," Damian replied. "Thank you," the judge said coldly. That would be all. The courtroom was adjourned for final deliberation. Outside, the crowd gathered around Chidera and his father. "You spoke like thunder," one elder said. Even the chief's men were shaking, another whispered. But Chidera remained calm. "We've done our part. Now we wait." His father touched his shoulder. "No matter what happens, I'm proud of you, my son." Back in her chambers, Justice Omolala Odigun sat with the weight of truth on her table. A poor man's dignity. A rich man's arrogance. And a son who dared to cast a net into the sea of injustice, hoping to pull out justice. The final hearing would come soon. And the verdict would echo across the land. Courtroom storms. The final day arrived with a sky heavy with clouds, as though even the heavens knew that something long overdue was about to break. The courtroom was overflowing. There were more people standing than sitting. Some came from other villages. Some had never stepped inside a court before. But everyone was there for one reason: to witness a reckoning. Chidera walked in with quiet confidence. He had done his part. Every document filed. Every witness prepared. Every truth exposed. Okizi sat in the gallery, hands shaking slightly, clutching the same hat he'd worn on the day his land was taken. His eyes never left his son. Chief Damian arrived last, flanked by his remaining aides. Gone were the proud smiles. Gone was the golden agboda. He wore a dull brown kaftan and dark glasses, as if trying to hide from judgment. Justice Omolala Odigun entered the court with a calm face and a fire in her eyes. The room held its breath. "This court," the judge began, "has reviewed all submitted documents, listened to all testimonies, and examined the historical ownership of the land in question." She paused and looked directly at Chief Damian. "The defendant, Chief Damian Uma, is hereby found guilty of unlawful acquisition of ancestral land, abuse of office, and the use of falsified documents to obtain personal gain." There was a loud gasp from the crowd. Some stood up in disbelief. The judge continued. "This court acknowledges that Mr. Okizi has lived and worked on this land for over 3 decades and that his family's ownership predates any formal documentation by the local authorities. The land shall be returned to Mr. Okizi immediately. All buildings and developments shall be surrendered unless fair compensation is arranged under Mr. Okizi's approval. Furthermore, the defendant is to pay restitution for damages, including the destruction of the plaintiff's property and disruption of livelihood." The gavel slammed. Case closed. The room exploded. Cheers. Tears. Okizi dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Chidera rushed to him, pulling him into an embrace. "You did it, Papa," he whispered. "We did it." Villagers crowded around them, some singing, others crying. Even those who once sided with Damian bowed their heads in respect. A few feet away, Chief Damian sat frozen. Defeated. Exposed. Alone. He stood up and tried to walk out unnoticed, but someone in the crowd said aloud, "The river remembers, Chief." And that simple line echoed like thunder. That evening, Chidera and his father returned to the land. No more fences. No more locked gates. They stood before the old Iroko tree, its roots still deep in the soil, its branches reaching for the sky. Okizi placed a hand on the bark. "I thought I lost everything that day," he murmured. "But I didn't. I still had hope. I still had you." Chidera smiled. "And now, we have it back. All of it." They walked the land slowly, like farmers inspecting fields, but deeper than that, like sons coming home to their ancestors. News of the victory spread across the region. People began bringing their land disputes to Chidera. Some were poor farmers. Others were widows. All had one thing in common: they'd been silenced too. Chidera decided to set up a free legal aid center in the village, right there on the recovered land. He called it the River Rights Initiative. Okizi became a local elder, not just in age, but in dignity. His name was now spoken with respect, even among chiefs. One morning, as they sat by the riverbank, Okizi turned to his son. "You know, I always thought I failed when I couldn't protect what was ours." Chidera shook his head. "No, Papa. You protected the one thing that mattered, you protected hope. You passed it to me. And I carried it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water. Justice had come. Not on wings of violence, but through the steady hands of truth and the unwavering heart of a fisherman's son. River of Redemption. 2 seasons later, the land no longer bore scars of betrayal, it bore fruit. The unfinished warehouse once claimed by Chief Damian now stood completed, not as a market or factory, but as a community legal center named the Okizi Foundation for Justice and Land Rights. Painted in cream and brown, it had a simple sign by the gate. Justice is like a river. It may be delayed, but it always flows back to its source. Chidera ran the center with a small team of young lawyers, some he trained, others he inspired. Every week, farmers, women, and elders came with cases. They were listened to, represented, and protected. For many, it was the first time the law worked for them. On the recovered land, Okizi built a new house, not large, but strong, with walls of brick, a zinc roof that sang in the rain, and windows that opened to the view of the river that raised him. He even expanded his fishery and hired other young men from the village. One day, a curious boy passing by asked him, "Baba, is it true Chief Damian once took your land?" Okizi laughed gently. "Yes, my son. But land can be taken. What matters is not losing your voice." As for Chief Damian, his fall from grace was steep. His assets were investigated. His political influence crumbled. The same government that once shielded him now distanced themselves. He remained in the village, a shadow of his former self, older, quieter, and strangely lonely. One Sunday morning, he visited the river. The villagers watched from a distance as he walked slowly to the edge, where Okizi was casting his net. "Brother," Damian said softly. Okizi turned. They hadn't spoken since the trial. "I came to apologize," Damian continued. "I thought wealth meant power. I thought silence meant weakness. But now I see, it is mercy that makes a man." Okizi didn't smile. He looked at the water and said, "Power is nothing without peace. And peace comes when the truth stands tall." He didn't hug him. He didn't curse him. He simply turned back to his nets. And that silence was louder than any forgiveness. Months later, Chidera was honored by the state for outstanding service in rural justice. The governor invited him to Abuja. His name appeared in national newspapers. But he returned to Oduoma after every award. Why? Because the river still called him home. One early morning, Chidera walked alone to the old Iroko tree. He touched its bark like he did years ago. But this time, he wasn't planning a battle. He was planting a seed, a small mango seedling, beside the tree. "For the next child who grows up here," he whispered, "may you find roots in truth. And may your shade be justice." At the dedication of the Legal Aid Center, Chidera gave a speech that would later be quoted in universities and town halls across Nigeria. "My father taught me that silence can be strength. But silence in the face of injustice must one day give way to voice. This land was not just reclaimed through courts, but through courage, truth, and patience. This center is not mine. It belongs to every forgotten voice. Every stolen dream. Every fisherman who refused to drown." The applause that followed wasn't just noise, it was healing. And as the sun set behind the river once again, Okizi sat beneath the mango tree with his grandchildren playing around him. He watched Chidera standing on the porch, speaking with clients, smiling with calm assurance. A man once robbed of his land now saw his legacy rising higher than any fence or title. He had nothing once. But now, he had everything that mattered. The river had wept once, but now it sang. Thank you for watching, and please never forget to subscribe and share.